Hello, everyone, and welcome to FIU's Biz Panther Game Changer series. During today's program, we will be focused on crisis management. The ongoing global pandemic has forced companies to take a long look at how they communicate, not only to retain consumer preferences, but to remain relevant during these difficult times. Today, we're going to learn about crisis management and how to manage and cultivate relationships with various stakeholders in a time of crisis. And we're delighted to have with us Jesus Rodriguez, a great friend of FIU Business and the head of public relations and corporate social responsibility for Latin America at Subway Restaurants. Jesus's career in public relations spans more than 2 decades, where he has worked for some of the world's leading brands. His crisis experience includes everything from cyber attacks and negative social media posts going viral to natural disasters, and of course, the current COVID pandemic. He is a proud FIU graduate and active member of the FIU Business Alumni Board, and he also mentors a number of students through our FIU mentoring program. Crisis communication is now arguably the most important area in corporate public relations. So it is my pleasure to welcome Jesus Rodriguez. Jesus, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Eddie. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this great group and be able to share a few thoughts on crisis communications with all of you. So just to give you a quick background, finished my bachelor's degree from FIU in 1996 in mass communication, majored in public relations, went back to school after a few years and got my MBA with a specialization in international business in 2005. Began my career in agency PR like a lot of young PR professionals do. It was a bit of a choppy resume there at the start, but the cool thing that I can say is I've actually worked for all 3 of the top 3 PR firms in the world, which is kind of a neat thing: Edelman, Weber Shandwick, and Fleishman Hillard. I joined the South Florida Water Management District in 2006, was there for about 5 years. And that's really where I would say that I ground my teeth in crisis communications. I got to work on a lot of hurricanes, and most notably, I was the public information officer for, if you were in South Florida in 2006, 7, and 8, you might remember we had a very severe water shortage. And I was the guy, I was the focal point for the agency in the midst of that crisis. So that was a tremendous experience. Joined Mondelez International in 2011, was there for about 7 years, managing external communications and government affairs, as well as some corporate social responsibility for Latin America. And been at Subway now for a couple of years, also in Latin America now, leading the public relations and CSR functions for our region. So that's a little bit about me. And again, I've done a little bit of everything, right? I've dealt with cyber attacks, I've dealt with natural disasters. I've counseled companies that have, as they've gone bankrupt, and I've had to pivot from protecting corporate reputations to protecting reputations of specific individuals. So it's kind of a neat set of experiences, and I'm delighted to be able to share a few stories with you today. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about crisis planning and define, what a crisis is from a communication standpoint. And then I just want to talk about some best practices through sharing with you some of my own personal experiences in crisis communications over the years. Now, I should preface this by saying that, this is not going to be a silver bullet for all of your specific situations, but I think that these are points that translate quite well in a variety of situations. You might, your business is certainly going to be different than mine. You might deal with small crises, big crises, what have you. But I think that, some of the things that we're going to talk about are pretty relevant to just about any situation. And then I'm going to wrap up with 3 characteristics of what I think are a good crisis response. Quite candidly, if you ask, 100 different communicators what their top 3 characteristics of a good response is, you're probably going to get 100 different answers. So that's just more of my own personal opinions. But I think I'm going to wrap up with that, and then we'll do some Q&A, and feel free to type in your questions during the course of the presentation, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. So what's a crisis, right? So from the standpoint of corporate communications, a crisis really is anything with the potential to negatively impact the reputation of the company or the brand. I'm back, Eddie. Sorry about that.
Hey,
I do not know what happened.
That's all right. That's all right. We are. Oh, just to wrap up what I was saying, you'll see in the chat there's a contact, cobadvance@fiu.edu. So COB, College of Business Advance fiu.edu if you wanted to share any speakers, topic suggestions, or ideas to the FIU alumni board, business alumni board. So with that, Jesus, let's get you back on here. And as I mentioned to our guest, the great thing is that with today's technology, we can always edit that out. So,
Great.
it'll look like nothing happened, right?
Wonderful.
But no, we appreciate it. Let's get you back on. I see the presentation. You just got to.
All right, there we go.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you.
All right, so we talked about defining a crisis and what crisis communications is, sort of in a nutshell. I was just starting to say that a crisis is always going to do one of two things for a business or for a leader, right? It's either going to bring out the best in you, or it's going to expose all your weaknesses, right? So that's the importance of getting the communications right, because it's going to have a lasting impact if you get it wrong. And sometimes, quite frankly, even if you get it right, you might have lasting impacts to the business depending on the nature of the crisis. And I'll give you a perfect example, with Subway itself. What do you think of in terms of PR nightmares when you think of Subway? You think of, the Jared fiasco. Never mind that the company severed its ties with that man, right? Within hours of the allegations of child pornography becoming public. Never mind that we stopped all advertising. We had been for the previous 15 years indelibly connected to him. So as our main brand spokesperson. So some things are going to be lasting, even if you get the communications right. So a simple crisis communications framework, crisis comms looks a lot like regular communications, right? The real added complexity is the nature of the lasting impacts to the business, right? The potential for damage to the brand's reputation or the company's reputation in the long term. So in a nutshell, I think what's most important when you talk about sort of that circle of communications is make sure that you're listening to what people are saying, to where the crisis situation is coming from, and make sure that you measure, right, that you understand everything about the nature of the issue and the potential ramifications to the business, right? So just to give you a simple framework of what communications would entail. So proper planning prevents poor performance. We hear about it in just about everything, right? You hear it during hurricane season. Get a plan. So I think the same applies for crisis communications in the corporate setting. You want to make sure that you have a plan in place in the event that something does happen, right? I'm thinking about Subway's own plan. You should see this document. It is a 40-page document. And if you take away the spreadsheet with all the various scenarios that we've already accounted for and developed action steps for and developed media statements for, it's a 20-page document, right? So it's a pretty thorough piece. I think every business should have one, whether you're large or small, whether you're a service business or something like a restaurant, which is a much more visible sort of a business. If you're a service business, I mean, your issues may be a little different. You may have legal challenges that you run into. You may have client disputes that arise that can very easily go viral. So it just runs the gamut. So what does a good crisis plan account for? Well, you want to make sure that you account for all channels of communication. Your website, for one. I think that most people, when you're looking for information about a business, you're going to probably go to the website first. You're probably going to go to social media second to listen to what your peers have to say about a particular company. So you want to have pre-approved statements, as I said, to engage in specific conversations. And then third, you're probably going to go to the mainstream media to see what news outlets are saying about you. The Wall Street Journal will still be more credible than Facebook as long as I'm alive, right? So the importance of traditional media cannot be understated. And again, outline a plan for how you're going to reach out to media with statements and things like that. And then, of course, don't forget about your internal channels, right? Employees are just as much of an important audience as your external stakeholders. So how do you communicate with them in the event of a crisis, right? How do you do you have town halls? Do you have email communications? And really the severity of the situation is probably directly related to the type of channel that you use, right? So these are things to consider. And of course, be sure to constantly monitor all of these channels so you are in tune with the dialogue around your company or your brand. The other thing that a good crisis communications plan should have it's a bunch of things, but specifically, I'm a big fan of developing criteria for determining the level of risk. And if you have a specific level of risk, right, already assigned, that is going to dictate the steps that you take to address a particular event, right? Outline possible scenarios, just kind of like how you might role play an interview with a news outlet before it happens. Well, outline possible scenarios of what are the things that could happen in your business. For example, at Subway, I don't know, it might be everything from a hair in my sub to somebody got shot in my restaurant to global pandemic. It's important to have all of those things contemplated in a crisis plan. And why? Because speed is of the essence. Whenever you're responding to a crisis, the last thing you want to do is sit there and have to, make very critical decisions without having that sort of a plan in place, without having that proper guidance in place. Make sure you have a decision-making process. You have to identify who decides what versus who just needs to be involved, right? It's important to have key decision makers because a lot of the times in situations like this, a lot of people will have their hands in this pie. If you predetermine who decides the specific steps that need to be taken, that goes a long way to improving your speed, the speed with which you react to a particular event. And train your spokespersons. Obviously, you want to identify who those spokespersons are. In most companies, it's going to be the CEO, it might be the head of finance, it might be the head of legal, it might be subject matter experts, depending on the particular issue, right? So you want to make sure that you have all of those people identified and trained. The last thing you want to do is have to sit there and train your CEO right before a media interview in the middle of a crisis. That training should happen way before any event takes place. So it's all about proper planning, folks. And if you have a good plan in place, again, whether you're a business large or small, it goes a long way to improving how you perform. So let's talk a little bit about some stories here and some important, I think, best practices for responding to particular crises. The first thing is, have your PR objectives in place. Like, know the kind of messages that you want to deliver. And it really, obviously, again, every situation is different, but you really sometimes you do want to take a step back a little bit sometimes before you immediately respond and just achieve a level of clarity as to what your messaging is going to consist of. So with regards to the water shortage, back in 2006, 7, and 8, obviously it was all around water conservation and maintaining the interest of the general public in what we knew was going to be a very long and drawn out crisis. It's not like a hurricane. A hurricane, you have 3 or 4 days where you're preparing. The event takes place within a few hours, maybe a day, and then you sort of just tear down and there's some sort of a resolution, right, for the week or two after that. Maybe people are losing power, so maybe it's a couple of weeks, what have you, right? A water shortage, like, you literally see things falling apart. You see water levels going down day after day for months, right? And there's nothing that you can do about it. And the crisis itself lasts 2 or 3 months. And then when you're pulling out of it, you're seeing water levels increasing steadily, and that could take several months as well. So I mean, it could be a year, it could be a year and a half, as was the case here in South Florida, that this event sort of draws out. So water conservation, keeping the public informed and engaged, and preserve the agency's credibility in what was, in fact, a very hostile media environment at times. You have to understand the complexities of the water management system. I won't get into all that, but there are some decisions that the agency makes based upon the best available science and the best available information that they have. That in hindsight, you're scratching your head. Things happen like that in the corporate world all the time as well. So preserving the agency's credibility also became key. The importance of dumbing things down, I think, is kind of like the point that I want to make with this slide, right? We have in South Florida, it's a very complex water management system. You have the Kissimmee River Valley feeding Lake Okeechobee, which feeds the Everglades. You have aquifers, it's all interconnected, and it's all dependent upon rainfall, right? So how do we dumb down these concepts for the general public? How do you, get somebody in Miami to really care about water conservation when they know that most likely nobody's going to shut off their taps, right? And the trick there is a couple of things that we did is make the situation visual, right? You always hear the saying, the picture tells 1,000 words. Well, we did a lot of that. We provided a lot of video footage. We provided a lot of images to the media. We took media members out to very stressed areas such as Lake Okeechobee, where the water levels went down tremendously. And another one of the neat things that we did is we obviously established the connection with the lake as the largest reservoir in the water management system, indeed in the entire state, and established that connection, and then used the lake as the barometer for the overall state of the water management system. So we provide daily updates that even weathercasters would use in their forecast, tracking the lake levels as it went down or as it went up, to provide folks with kind of a status of the state of the water management system. And again, driving home that point of continued engagement and the need to conserve water, right? Because we're all in this together. So that was one of the neat things that we did. And you see some of the resources there. The other thing that we did is leveraging even the most mundane events over the course of the crisis to retain public interest and retain a public engagement throughout the length of the event, right? Which again, in this case, lasted over a year. Give you a couple of really neat examples here. Archaeological digs happen in the state of Florida every day, all the time, right? But an archaeological dig a mile into the largest lake in the state of Florida, right, within the lake boundaries, that doesn't get to happen all the time. So there's your story right there, right? That the fact that you're shoveling dirt in what used to be 10 feet of water, that's a pretty neat visual. So we made a story around that. A fire, we had a fire in the middle of the lake during the water shortage. Fires happen in South Florida all the time. You just never hear about them because they're no threat to people or property, as was this one. But a fire that you can see from space a mile into the lake, that's a story, right? So we leverage these, even again, little mundane things. I wouldn't call it fire mundane per se, but things that do happen on a regular basis, and you make stories out of them to retain the attention of the general public, retain their interest, and again, continue to solidify your credibility as the agency managing these resources. So another one of the things that I wanted to stress is the importance of alliances, partnerships, right? Even unlikely allies. For years, the Water Management District had wanted to implement lawn watering restrictions, and indeed restrictions on the use on various uses of water for golf courses, for nurseries, growers, food growers, all kinds of things. And we just hadn't been able to do that for many years. And with the growing population, and dwindling water resources, or sort of the bucket doesn't get any bigger, but the population does, and we all kind of have to share it. It became important to implement these kinds of restrictions. And what we did was we really fostered these relationships with the Nursery Growers and Landscape Association, the golf course superintendents, other large users of water, so that together we can, get the public behind lawn watering restrictions and restrictions on other uses, such as for golf courses and other things. So the importance of alliances, and even unlikely alliances, cannot be understated. And at the end of the year, it was one of the biggest news stories of 06, 07, and 08. Really, in the state of Florida, it was second only to the mortgage crisis that was going on at the time. And again, we really did a good job to not just inform the public, but keep them engaged, and preserve the agency's credibility. And again, what was pretty often a hostile environment. So let's talk about COVID. Fast forward now to 2020. I'm at Subway, and this happens, right? We're talking about a very far-reaching global pandemic that not only impacts our business, it impacts our industry, and not only impacts our industry, but impacts a variety of other industries in very visible ways. Obviously, the most visibly impacted have been the airline industries, the cruise industries, hotels, and of course, restaurants. You see a lot of You see a lot of that, a lot of coverage around the impacts to these industries in the news. So again, the importance of having very specific PR objectives. And in this case, we're not just trying to generate awareness of the brand and keep the brand top of mind. We're still trying to drive sales. We're trying to use communications to drive sales, even in the face of this pandemic, right? In our case, we're 100% franchise owned. So, this is not just a Subway corporate that's worried about this. It's individual franchise owners whose livelihoods literally are at stake. So, so how do we use communications to, again, continue to keep the brand top of mind and drive sales? So a couple of things that we did, and I'll talk a little bit more about these in a second. We wanted to, first of all, generate goodwill, communicate that we're in this together, solidarity with our various audiences, communicate peace of mind, and again, driving sales. And we did that through a number of different tactics. So let's talk about some some important best practices that in my view we successfully implemented over the course of the last few months. The first is a very present chief executive. It's in an event like this, it's not the PR guy that's going to be speaking with the media and being the focal point of media inquiries and being the face of the brand. It's the chief executive. It has to be, because of the gravity of the situation. You definitely want to give it the weight that it merits. The only way to do that is to put your CEO front and center. A lot of executives are not comfortable in the spotlight, and that's okay. But in critical situations such as this, they've just got to get around that. Right, and you as a communicator, you've got to be able to communicate that, the importance of that to your chief executive. Fortunately, we've had a very engaged CEO who's been very often quoted in the press. We've had internal video messages, and he's done town halls to keep employees engaged as well. So a very present chief executive, particularly in a crisis like this, that's critical. In smaller sort of issues like, I don't know, there's a hair in my sub, that's not the chief executive's bag, if you will, right? That's something that can be handled at the store level. If, for example, there's a crime that happens at a local Subway, and that's garnering media attention, then maybe it's I or somebody local who would, or maybe a regional director or something like that, who would be quoted in the press. But again, you want to give the situation the weight that it merits. And a situation like this, certainly it needs to be the CEO. One of the first things that we wanted to communicate was, hey, we're in this together. We're a member of your community. Communicate solidarity, right? Demonstrate that we're all in this together. That was a very important message for us. And the way that we communicated that was also by solving an operational issue that arose, right? As sales started to dwindle, I mean, literally from one week to the next, we were looking at 60, 70% reductions in our sales. Our stores were closing. People just weren't coming out to eat. People just weren't ordering, particularly at the onset of the pandemic. So how do we solve this operational issue of these inventories that are going to go bad, right? And also communicate solidarity with the various communities that where we live and work at the same time. So we decided to just run a series of donations. We literally had employees making subs in stores that were otherwise closed so that they would be donated to first responders, to police, sometimes even military. But by and large, it was hospital workers, first responders, essentially the people at the front line in the response against the pandemic, right? Fighting in the front lines against the pandemic. The stroke of genius that we implemented here is we took a Sharpie and we drew a personal message on every single sub that we donated, right? We're with you, we appreciate your hard work, Viva Honduras, whatever, It was short messages like that. And it was that personal touch that really drove the point of solidarity home, right? And that's the kind of impact that you want to have in a situation like this. I think that the first most important message that you want to communicate is we're in this together, and that's what we achieved. So I talked about, alliances, partnerships. You can't underscore the importance of partnering with a multitude with multiple organizations in times like this. So over the course of several months, we developed new promotions and new partnerships with various third-party delivery companies like Uber Eats, and in Latin America, Rappi and Ugo are two others that are quite substantial. And we just implemented joint promotions with all three of them. And there were a couple of others as well. The idea, again, is to use these to, alert people that, hey, we're still open for business. Even if you're not coming out to Subway, you can order online, and you're driving sales that way. It's difficult, it's difficult to communicate those sorts of messages in an environment like this. But again, if you get the solidarity part right, then that opens the door to, hey, we're still open for business, right? We also, from an operational standpoint, fast-tracked a number of initiatives, new product launches. You see pizza there in Brazil that we fast-tracked from Q4 to the end of Q2. And it's, all, again, in an effort to keep the brand top of mind and all of that. But as you'll see in a minute, a lot of other companies were doing the same things. Social media was huge. How do you keep consumers engaged, right? It's no longer about, sending a message and just, getting a hit in a particular newspaper or sending a message via social media. How do you engage, like actually genuinely have a dialogue with your consumers? A lot of what we did over the past several months was stuff like this, simple little polls, right? Do you prefer a cookie, or we have this other really good dessert in Brazil? It's like a chocolate. Think of it as like a chocolate, mousse thing. So cookie versus the mousse thing. What's your favorite sauce? In a couple of markets, what we did was we actually had kind of like a March Madness for our sauces, right? Do you like the chipotle versus the, garlic aioli, whatever? And we did kind of like an elite 8 of all of our sauces, and I can't remember which was the winner in the end, but it varied by market. And we did stuff like that, right, to keep people to just have fun. A lot of the times, people just want to be distracted in a time like this. People just want to sense some semblance of normalcy, right? And that's the kind of environment that we're trying to foster with the engagements in social media. And of course, touting delivery and curbside pickup wherever that's available, other things like that became important messages for us. So that's what we did. So that's a word on engagement, right? And really having that two-way dialogue with your customers and your various audiences to stay top of mind. Let's talk about the operational part. No amount of communications is going to fix things if you don't get the operation right. And obviously, the pandemic has forced the restaurant industry and a lot of other industries to take a long, hard look at how they do business and what their safety protocols are, right? So we've implemented, and we're continuing to implement, a whole host of new safety procedures all across our 40,000 plus restaurants around the world. And these are just some of them, right? We fortunately have a little street cred when it comes to this sort of thing, because we were among the very first restaurants in the entire world, certainly among the first global chains, to implement the use of sterile plastic gloves for all food preparation in all of our restaurants. We did that back in October of 1997, was when we first began using sterile gloves around the world. So we have a little street cred there, but it was incumbent upon us, given the environment, to do other things too, right? And provide peace of mind for our guests. So we've increased the frequency of hand washing requirements in our stores. We started talking about how we clean and sanitize our produce and prepare our produce, obviously using gloves. But again, we started doing brand new things like implementing social distancing measures. We've got these really cool, informative decals that there are 2 little footprints that we put on the floor, to encourage folks to maintain social distance. We have retrained our employees in food safety. So we are actually recertifying every single employee in our restaurants around food safety, specifically as a result of this pandemic. We focused on delivery. We focused on, curbside or takeout options. And indeed, we're finding that that's becoming, part of the new normal. I mean, it used to be we never really played a whole lot in the delivery space because of the Subway experience. You're there, you're watching your sandwich being made in front of you. You can tell us to put a little more lettuce, a little less onions, whatever, right? So we make it's a very customized experience. Customization is a big thing for us, right? So we never really played a whole lot in the delivery space. I mean, we have delivery, working with third-party vendors and stuff like that, but it was just not a big part of our business. In fact, it was probably for most locations less than 10% of their business. Now these days, delivery is accounting for upwards of 50% of most of our store's business. So that's going to be the new normal, and that's definitely going to be here to stay. So operationally, again, you've got to get it right. Otherwise, the old saying, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Well, you've got to get your business right if you're going to, if communications is going to help you all, right? So I wanted real quick to share a video. One of the things that we've really focused on from a messaging standpoint is, this whole notion of offering peace of mind to our guests, right? People want to know that what they're eating is safe, what they're eating is healthy, that we've implemented the right procedures in place to prevent as best we can the spread of COVID, that we're wearing masks and all of that. And that's the kind of message that we want to deliver. So we've been implementing videos like this across the region, and I'll just play it real quick so you can see more or less what we're talking about. So this video was produced in actually in all three languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese for Latin America. Plays off our tagline, make it what you want, right?
Jesus, I don't think we can hear the sound. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
you can't? Okay, well, sorry about that.
You might have to click on that share sound.
All right, so but you get the idea. I apologize. Yeah, I had to share the sound as well. Hang on, share computer sound there. That should work for the next one. So, but you get the idea, right? Where the visuals are all about just the care with which your product is made. You see the cleaning surfaces and stuff like that. So it's again providing peace of mind to consumers. So the media results around the what we call them the safe protocols, it was really good. We had a whole news release about that, and had many of our geographic directors, area directors, service spokespersons around this topic and how they're implementing that in their local geographies. But then we came up across what I circled up there, right? And that's the roundup news stories, right? Everybody in the industry was doing the exact same thing. We're all talking about safety. We're all talking about implementing these new protocols. We're all talking about cleanliness. We're all emphasizing delivery. So the question becomes, how do you break through that clutter? What happens when everybody sounds the same? And that's going to happen in a situation like this, right? A corporate crisis, a lot of the times, is individual to a company. Very seldom, unless it's a natural disaster or something like that, very seldom is it going to be as far-reaching as the experience that you're seeing now. So how do you break through the clutter when everybody sounds the same? The simple answer is this. You leverage a product or service or brand attribute, right, that you can deliver a little better than just about everybody else, right, that nobody can deliver quite like you can. In the case of Subway, our competition in Latin America, we've got a lot more competition here in the United States, different sub shops coming up like Jersey Mike's, even Publix, right, is a competitor these days. But specifically for Latin America, we're still talking about Burger King and McDonald's and even Domino's. So we play a little healthier than most of our competition, and we also leverage customization as a big brand attribute for us. So again, what I was talking about earlier, the ability to make that sub, in front of folks, and you're the one that owns that entire process. That's the key for us. So there's that. And then another thing that we did that we're actually starting to implement now across Latin America is this, right? We have a product that's a 6-foot long sub that we make for catering, right? For catering events and things like that. So in the Netherlands, which is the video that I'm going to show you now, because I wasn't able to get the video from Brazil in time for this presentation. In the Netherlands, they did a whole PR stunt around this particular product. It's 6 feet long, right? So it's kind of like you're thumbing your nose at social distancing, and they framed it around a reopening phase that the government was implementing. Here in Latin America, we're positioning it more as a product for you to enjoy with your family, with your friends, in small settings. With perhaps within companies. Now that folks are starting to go back to their offices and stuff like that, so the positioning is a little different, but the PR stunt is very much the same, right? We want people to see this product as it's going around the streets. Their community is being delivered. So actually, this is
Anderhalf meter lange broodje.
Please, breek niet.
Wat is een brood? Oh, wow.
Holy shit.
Lekker hè? Lekker hè?
It's a good day for the subway.
So that's what we did in the Netherlands, right? And we pulled a similar stunt in Brazil. You see the 2 folks on a tandem bike and that rode across town, and we delivered it to a social media influencer. We had another one that was delivered to a local food bank or a community kitchen, I believe it was, and then the influencer was there. So I mean, we had a really good PR stunt around that whole activation. So again, how do you differentiate yourselves? It's 2 ways, right? It's leveraging a brand attribute, a product or service that no one can deliver quite like you can. And then I'm thinking outside the box. So real quick summary of some of the media coverage. One of the things that we did not get saddled into is talking specifically about, number of store closures and things like that. We had good coverage for our donations. We had, good coverage in roundup stories. We had coverage around delivery. We had coverage around, some of the interesting promotions that we had. This example down here in Puerto Rico was offering a coffee break to first responders and hospital and healthcare workers. Anybody who would bring, their hospital badge would get a free coffee and a cookie as a little coffee break, as a way of Subway saying thanks for their hard work. But we purposely haven't talked about closures because that's kind of a sore topic. It's nothing that we're hiding. I mean, we're saying that our experience is not inconsistent with the rest of the restaurant industry. So, at the end of this year, probably, we're still opening stores, sure, but net, we're definitely going to have fewer stores globally, not just in Latin America, than we did at the end of last year, right? And it's a direct result of the pandemic. But the important point that I want to make here is you don't have to divulge any information that you don't want to, unless you're a public company and you have to talk about sales figures and that kind of a thing. But really, by and large, you don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to or media or otherwise, right? You don't have to divulge any information that you don't want to. So fortunately, the coverage around our brand has been particularly positive, and we haven't really been saddled with talking about numbers and stuff like that. In fact, how we handle those questions is, stating the obvious, right? Our experience is not inconsistent with the rest of the restaurant industry. It's possible that we will have closures at the end of the year. However, our focus right now is working very closely with all of our franchise owners to make sure that all of us reach the light at the end of this tunnel in as best shape as we possibly can. And that's our message. I'll spare you some of the research findings and stuff like that, but the point that I wanted to make with this slide in particular is, it's important to listen to your customers. What we've done at Subway is we've upped our consumer insights from quarterly studies to now monthly during the pandemic. Why? Because it's important for us to know what is driving people, what their fears are, what they're concerned about, particularly our customers, what's driving them to make the decisions that they're making with regards to where they choose to eat. So we need to understand all of that so that we can make appropriate decisions in terms of promotions. Where do we invest? Do we invest, our dollars in talking about delivery, or do we talk about other things, relevant to the business? So it's important to understand your customer, right? And you do that through surveys and a bunch of other things. But the key message, again, driving that home is important to understand and listen to your customers. Sometimes you get a crisis on top of a crisis. And, one of the perfect example was the series of violent protests that we saw in the United States earlier this year in numerous cities. We didn't escape that, right? There was at least 2 subways that I'm aware of that were looted in different communities across the US. The point I wanted to make here is, we obviously, have a position on issues like systemic racism, racial injustice. Obviously, we stand against any form of racial injustice, right? That's clear. And obviously, we're going to support things like, the Blackout Tuesday movement. We will be quoted in the press, obviously, from time to time on that position. It's obvious, right? It's obvious that we stand against those things. In fact, we're a business that's built on diversity. So the point that I want to make here is, knowing when to carry the flag versus just, in other words, be a leader in the dialogue, leading the dialogue versus just, participating in it. And the important thing to understand there is, how is this relevant to our brand? How is this a reflection of our brand? A company like Subway, of course we're going to have a position, but we're not going to carry the flag on this issue, right? We're going to let other companies do that. Companies like Nike, for example, that's more central to who they are, right? Those are the ones that are leading the national dialogue around this topic. We're just a participant. So it's important to know from a corporate standpoint when to carry the flag versus when you want to lead a particular dialogue. So what do we lead in, for example? Well, we have other particular issues that are less more mundane, if you will, right? That we do carry the flag on. For example, we've got a very strong position against single-use plastics. It's not as big an issue as systemic racism, obviously, but that's something that's relevant to our business because we are a very visible user of plastic straws, lids, forks, or what have you. So, and we're the world's largest restaurant chain. So of course we're going to have a position on things like that. And it's important for us to educate consumers on what the appropriate behaviors are, right? So, so those are the kind of conversations that we choose to carry the flag on, and we're participants in other dialogues, right? So I think knowing when to carry the flag is another important part of a crisis response. And then with that, I just wanted to very quickly highlight 3 things that I think are important for 3 characteristics of a great crisis response. First and foremost is speed and decisiveness, right? The last thing you want to do is dilly-dally and wait, hours even. I mean, with social media these days, I mean, if you're not responding in a matter of a few minutes, things can blow up out of proportion. Even little posts that don't seem like a big deal can very suddenly go viral if you don't take care of them, right? So it's important to act decisively and have speed in your response. And again, that's why it's important to plan and make sure that you already have specific steps in place for various scenarios that can pop up. Empathy, demonstrating to people that you're in this together, right? Sometimes, particularly in a crisis such as this, with the far-reaching impacts that we're seeing, empathy is incredibly important. Demonstrating that you're showing solidarity, and then transparency. That's one that a lot of senior executives struggle with sometimes. They look at you and they say, why do we want to talk about that? Well, it's because you don't want to have this be a long, drawn-out process, right? You want to, if something happens, particularly if it's a self-inflicted injury, if you will, you want to acknowledge it, apologize, communicate what you're doing in order to fix it, and move on. You don't want to say, oh no, we didn't, that didn't happen, or we're investigating, because then what happens? The story drags out 2, 3, 4 days, months, sometimes years, right? That's the last thing you want to do. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with senior executives where I tell them, you know what, man, the best thing that you can do is just tell the truth, acknowledge it, communicate what you're doing to fix it, and move on, right? And I think generally people appreciate that. And there's some very specific examples of, just how that's worked, and some very specific examples of how companies and other entities have, tried to dance around an issue, and it's dragged on forever, and it's severely damaged their reputation. So with that, I realize that we're a little over time here. I wanted to leave at least 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, but I realize that I don't have that time. I apologize for the technical issues earlier. So if there's any questions, I'll be glad to take them. Savannah, can you help me? Are there any questions in the chat? Or Vanessa already?
Yes, we have some in the Q&A. If you click on the Q&A
Oh, I see it.
button
I
on the
see it. I see
bottom.
it. So jealous of Subway Brazil desserts. Yeah, I am too. You should see we have some very interesting sandwiches as well all throughout the region that we don't have here in the U.S. But that'll be a topic for another day. In terms of entrepreneurship, how do I go about creating and sustaining competitive advantage within a business? That it depends on the nature of your business. Whether you're a restaurant or whether you're a service business, for example. I think the key, as I mentioned earlier, is identifying or coming up with, right, just what it is that you can deliver a little bit better than everybody else, right? And you would structure your campaigns and your key messages, even your social media presence, around that specific competitive advantage. Can you speak on the moral implication of protecting an individual or company's image during a crisis caused by their wrongdoing? Ooh, that's a good one. Well, yeah, that is a very, very good question. And sometimes I can't say that I've been in a situation where I've genuinely been conflicted in terms of protecting someone's image in light of their own wrongdoing. Fortunately, clearly, that's a matter of one's own personal sort of willingness to engage in that sort of thing. It's not a bridge I've had to cross, to be completely honest with you. The situations that I had early on in my career, where I've had to try and preserve a person's reputation. I can't say necessarily that a company failed because of their wrongdoing per se. I think everybody generally had good intentions. It's just the business model didn't work. Things happen. Companies fail, right? And we had to kind of pivot to try and preserving their reputations. But again, I honestly didn't feel conflicted over that. I think that it was just the time. A lot of companies went under that just didn't have good business models. A lot of people made some very bad investments. But again, it was just kind of like everybody was doing it at the time. But fortunately, to your point, I've never really felt like I was, trying to protect someone who should have gone to jail or anything like that. In terms of, got that one. Q&A button, got that. How long did it take me to build up my expertise? Well, I think I benefited a tremendous amount by starting my career on the agency side. You get kind of thrown into things immediately, and you're kind of asked to be resourceful and sort of fend for yourself, if you will. I would say, I would say it still took me quite a few years to get to the point where I feel comfortable considering myself a quote unquote expert in a particular area. Crisis is one of those things that I just have happened to have done a lot of work in, and it's an area where I feel particularly comfortable. Latin America, generally speaking, Latin America and the U.S. Hispanic market, those are areas where I've worked in a tremendous amount. So I feel comfortable, right? And I think it could be a matter of years. My advice would just be, to keep your enthusiasm, right? And just try and continue learning from those folks who are experts in your field. And and pursue, specific lines of work. I realize that, that it's not easy when you're starting out and you probably have student loans and stuff like that. And it's hard to trade off what you really want to do for perhaps a better paycheck. But my advice would be to grind your teeth in the areas that you really want to focus on, because the payoff is going to come around at the end, right? Some of the implications to consider when determining when to carry the flag, participant in public issues. Okay. What are some of the implications to consider when determining when to carry the flag? To me, the most critical criteria is whether or not a particular issue is relevant to the brand or has a direct reflection on the brand. Case in point, that as I mentioned earlier, the issue of single-use plastics, we're the #1 restaurant in the world. We're a very visible user of single-use plastics. I think it's our responsibility to have a position on that particular issue and to lead a dialogue around it. I don't see why we wouldn't. There are other issues that are more, again, and the issue of systemic racism. We're a participant in that dialogue. There's no question about it. We support, again, movements like the Blackout Tuesday movement, and we obviously have a position on that because, again, we're a company that was built on diversity. But it's probably more relevant for other companies to lead that discussion and other entities to lead that discussion on a national level. I think, entities like the NAACP, companies like Nike, probably have greater street cred than Subway does when it comes to that particular issue. So again, of course, we're going to be a participant, but we're not going to be carrying that flag. And I think the most important criteria to answer your question directly, again, is probably relevance to the brand and who you are as a business. So that would be my advice. I'm a public relations advisor for, okay. Any way we could get in contact with you? Yes, absolutely. Perfect segue to my next slide. So I'll wrap up. I know that we're at time. Everyone, I appreciate you sticking around and appreciate your interest in this topic. So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts, right? If you like reading, I've got a couple of really good suggestions for you. The first is Lincoln on Leadership, Executive Strategies for Tough Times. This is it's a really good study of Lincoln and his writings and his speeches and stuff like that. Obviously, one of the greatest presidents we had as a nation. And talk about a crisis. I mean, you have 7 states seceding from the Union within days of your inauguration. A civil war follows, and you are tasked with preserving the Union. It just doesn't get any more intense than that. So I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from stuff like that happened a couple hundred years ago even. But it's a great book if you like reading. I've always been kind of a student of leadership. I've read all these leadership books, but I think that one's a very easy read. It's short and it's an excellent sort of storytelling type book. The other one is this one, Shackleton, Leadership Lessons from Antarctica by Arthur Easburg. So in the early 1900s, there were 2 British expeditions to Antarctica, right? Obviously in search of, they wanted to get to the South Pole. They both had plenty of supplies for years. They both had seasoned sailors. They both failed miserably. They got stuck in the ice and they had to endure a terrible winter in the Antarctic. The difference is that in one of those expeditions, just about everybody died. And in the Shackleton expedition, every single man came home alive, right? The difference was leadership. The difference was in the approach and in how each of the leaders approached the same crisis. And I think it's this particular book, it's a really fascinating read, super short as well, and packed with really good lessons if you're into reading about that sort of stuff. And then if you'd like to connect, you've got my LinkedIn info right there. I just ask that you please just drop me a note. I don't connect with everybody, but just drop me a quick note, say, hey, I saw your presentation, would like to connect, and I'll be happy to connect. And if you have any questions afterwards, be happy to have a conversation with you offline or exchange a few emails with you. I'm a proud FIU alum, so happy to support my FIU brethren every time I can. And that's what I've got, folks. Appreciate your time today. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with those of you who would like to. Eddie, turning it back to you if you want to say any closing remarks, or Vanessa, or anyone.
Thank you so much for everybody who joined us today, and Jesus. We look forward to the next session, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Ciao.
Take care.